Yeah, we're live. And yes, I know the thumbnail is upside down, at least for right now. I can flip it over, but that's for the guys down in Australia. We love our friends down in Australia. They're seeing it upside down. They're seeing it right side up. We're seeing it upside down. It all works. It all works good. So today we want to talk about turbos and blowers living in harmony. And I got an interesting question, and I think it's I think his question was actually very, very specific, but generally I think it confuses people. So his concern was on a turbo blower compound setup like we ran on I've run them on the 0304 Cobra setup with the guys from HP Performance with twin turbos blowing through the factory supercharger on that 0304 Cobra motor the way it came from the factory. And then on the 3800 V6, the L67, with a single turbo blowing in, blowing into that M90. So his concern was, and this will be our poll. We'll put this up there. Turbo. Okay, is a GT45 turbo a restriction to the blower on a compound turbo blower 3800 V6? I can't go into more detail because we're limited in characters, but what his concern is, I don't think that the turbo is restricting the blower like all the time, like at the top end or whatever. I don't think that's his question, because the answer to that is no, the turbo is not a restriction to the blower. I think that his concern was, is the turbo a restriction to the blower? Because when you first like nail the throttle, let's say, we know if we compare the naturally aspirated motor with the turbo, and this is the way that you would run all this testing. You'd run the motor NA, then you'd run the NA motor with just the turbo, then you run the NA motor with just the blower, and then you'd run them together. That way you have all of the data and you could kind of compare this. We know what is going to happen when we run the NA motor with the turbo. You're going to nail the throttle, the turbo is going to come on depending on how you size the turbo, and then you're going to make this power. So the NA motor with its naturally aspirated torque output down low is going to spool the turbo up depending on the size of the turbo at some rate, and then you're going to get boost, and then all the happiness is going to happen. With the blower is going to be immediate boost, and it's going to go up and make power the way that it does with that supercharged application. When you combine them, what happens is, unlike just using the NA motor to supply boost to the turbo, we're going to have supercharged power, so much more power supplying exhaust energy to the turbo to get it spooled up. So we know that the turbo spools up faster like that. It's much more responsive because essentially it has another 100 or 150 horsepower, how much ever extra power that blower is adding. It has that much more, and it has that down low too, because the roots blower is going to be immediate boost. It's going to have low speed power. That's one of the benefits of having a positive displacement blower like that, is it has immediate, it has immediate torque production. And so that helps with turbo spool. His question, as I understand it, is not that. His question is when you first step on the gas, and we know that the blower has like immediate boost response, but when you first do that, which is going to be before the turbo spools up, is the turbo limiting the airflow? Because the blower and the throttle body is like right in front of the blower between the supercharger and the turbo. So when the throttle blade goes open, the blower and the engine have to draw air through the turbo. So his concerns on that initial thing, is the turbo restricting that? Like, should he build some sort of bypass to go around the turbo so the blower can just draw naturally aspirated air, and then until it comes time to, for the exhaust energy to be building boost? I'm like, wow, that's going to be an interesting switch situation you have there. And my comment was that I think you're worried about something that's not there. because even if you were to power brake this thing, and if you look at the comparison between the turbo by itself and then the blower and the turbo was much more responsive. So the boost came on a lot faster that way. So I think you're nitpicking trying to get it to get the to think that the blower is restrictive. I think by the time that I just don't think it's going to help. I don't think you're going to see anything. I don't think that the turbo, the way that he's thinking about it, particularly at the lowest airflow need of the motor, which is at low RPM, I don't think that that's going to be restrictive. I don't think that that's going to be an issue. He wants to open a valve and have it just draw air from out, right outside away from the turbo, and then have that close, and then have the turbo provide the boost to there, so it's not leaking or anything. And while all of that is nice, and maybe he could do something there, but I don't think so. I think he's worried about something that's not really there. Because if you have a blower motor, that's awesome. If you have a turbo motor, that's awesome. If you have both of them, you could argue that it's even awesomer. In reality, it's not. The blower just becomes in the way. And that's what I told him. I said, like, eventually the blower is just in the way. The blower is restricting the airflow that the turbo wants to provide to the motor. I said, you have a big rise and boost because you're compounding that. And so for the given power level, the boost level, which is why I'm not a fan of compound stuff. Me for diesels, I guess, if you're having to do that. And then I did that on the little sprint motor, but the boost, the pressure that you get is so high that I just would rather have the turbo be there. We could make the same power or more power at a much lower boost level because you're not compounding it. But you don't have the response that you do when the blower is also there. And you can't say that it's like having a twin turbo setup. You don't have a compound setup, because you could say that and it's cool. And it is. It's like I said, there's not a bad choice here except for the NA motor, which is not terrible, but it's still not as good as any of the other chosen combinations where you have the NA motor, which and everything that entailed, and then also boost. So that's just more on top of something, and that's obviously always good. So I think that having the blower on there, good. Having the turbo on there, good. Having the blower and the turbo, there are some guys that would think that would be the best thing. For me, the turbo would be the best thing by itself. Just a good turbo, right size turbo, and the motor size so that it made the power that I wanted it to make. And if you were wanting to make, like on that 3800, you put 1,000 horsepower turbo on there, it's going to be a little bit laggy. But I wouldn't run it with the blower trying to make 1,000 horsepower. I would want that to be out of the way. I'd rather just have a big air to water intercooler there and ice water and stuff and do all that. If you wanted to come on sooner, hit it with a 75 shot or something. It'll all be fine. So we'll see what you guys got going on. I've got to cut out a little early tonight, so I want to try to get on early. Knowledge, Dennis, Brian, what's up? Rover's in the house. Happy Thanksgiving. Hello. Or is that ELO? Electric Light Orchestra. But it's worth it. I think for the first 2 seconds, the turbo is going to be the restriction. But once the turbo spools up the blower, it's going to be. So you think that's going to happen for 2 seconds? I would argue it'd be a percentage of 1 second. Do like Volvo's did and have an air tank with compressed air that has its own compressor for anti-lag. Yep, all of that stuff is possible, but that all of this would be assuming that there was some kind of lag, and in the setup that we ran, it just wasn't there. I can say with confidence that the atmospheric turbo does not pose a restriction to any compressor in the middle of the system. I log the pressure between my turbos and never see a drop in pressure. Yeah, no, we're Chris. We were talking about just like the initial kind of thing. Blower the bypass for the wind. Use the blower down low, and then clutch the pulley and bypass the blower for turbo goodness. And yeah, unfortunately, I've not seen bypass valves that flow anywhere near enough to go completely around the blower. Do you remember why Banks says not to compound with a twin screw? I don't think that applies here, but I still don't agree with that. How can we make the blower not be the restriction? Say, would a larger blower like a 3.8 be less restrictive on a compound setup over even the small Eaton? The blower will always be in the way of the turbo. the blower is never going to be as efficient. And then you're always going to have the torque multiplication, or not the torque, the boost multiplication of the compound setup. So I don't think that, I think that the turbo is way more efficient. You're always going to make more power with just the turbo at any given boost level. Is there a problem if the lifters don't go into the bottom of the trays when you manually turn over the engine on the stand? They don't stick in there. Yeah, Tim, you want new or different trays. North Wales is in the house. I'd argue the blower isn't a restriction in the case unless you're over speeding it. 6th Street, Saturday adult beverage. I know, I haven't had one of those. Doesn't apply here, but Banks proved it on a dyno. More boost, pre-blower, 1. Whipple made less power. I have brand new OEM GM trays just bought for the stand. And the lifters, the tray doesn't hold the lifter. I've never run across that on a GM tray before. Is it a weird lifter or something? Have you ever done a comparison with a 671 blower with and without a 4-inch spacer? Spacer goes under the blower and the top of the intake manifold. I think you've asked that question before. I haven't ever done that. Like instead of just an open plenum instead of the intercooler that normally goes there. More boost pre-blower on a Whipple made less power. What about side-by-side inlets for what? You want to have 2 throttle bodies going into the blower, one that you can close and then one that opens up for the turbo. Have you seen the turbos on the new 01? I did. They're really cool. I think that that's a fantastic motor. I think that's the most sophisticated, most powerful motor they've ever made. I think it's a testimony to the engineers, like a tip of the hat to the engineers for that one. Particularly because I want to see somebody go out and if it looks like they went to it looks like they went with the gearing that they had past the horsepower peak. I think that they went to the rev limiter, which is past the horsepower peak, which tells me with different gearing that car goes faster. Yeah, Peter, I remember you've asked a few times, but I've never done that. I've never just put a spacer under there. Does somebody make a spacer for that? Or is that something that have to be made? Or just, do they have intercooler ones where you could take the intercooler brick out? Only thing you changed was wastegate spring, and heavier wastegate spring made less power, and it was insane. More boost after the blower too, but less power. So how did he increase the pressure and then not increase the power? Do you think having a blower turbo combo on a 2-stroke would have a noticeable turbo lag? I don't know. I haven't done any 2-stroke testing other than I did my GoPed, but we didn't ever add boost to it. Roots blowers are good for compounding though. Okay. Do you think the dual Whipple on a 565 is better than the big single Whipple? I don't know what size the duals are, and I don't know what size power output you're trying to do. You obviously have to size the blower or blowers so that they can support the power level. I don't know where you want to go, and I don't know what the dual kit was. I don't remember how big they were. 1 inlet for the blower, 1 for the turbo. Speedmaster makes a 2-inch one. The 2-inch spacer between the blower. I don't know how an open spacer is going to change power under the blower, but I think it would be a cool thing to test. Because of the way the Lysol pattern blower works, higher inlet pressure skyrockets parasitic loss. The blower has consuming more horsepower than the extra boost made. It was on a diesel. Yeah, I remember you talking about that. How come you no longer make videos on the Honda B series? I still have some I could make. I don't have either one of those cars anymore. If you use a chiller under 671 on a street car, would you run an ice box and a heat exchanger or just an ice box? I wouldn't run ice if I'm using it to drive on the street. I would just use water. A water and a heat exchanger and a reservoir and a pump, just like you do on any other air to water thing. Did some math. I'm going to be putting $2,700 into my North Star engine just to make it more durable for the turbos. When doing your first engine swap from a small block Ford, do you take angles and heights into the play, for instance, to make sure everything lines up, or just engine and... Are you talking about the drive shaft angle, Tim? Yes, it's made just as a spacer with absolutely nothing in the way. So I was wondering whether it changed the power curve, being that it changes the intake runner volume. It doesn't change the intake runner volume. It just changes the plenum volume, which in my testing has shown no, almost no power change. Runner length does a lot, but just plenum volume doesn't seem to have a big effect. It's something I would want to check if guys think that it's something. Yeah, Admiral, I'm pretty familiar with how the superchargers work. In a truck application where torque is a key, would a large cubic inch and smaller blower work better than a smaller cubic inch and a larger blower? Yes. Yeah, because with the second combination, you have less torque from the motor and less response from the blower. I don't know what blower you're talking about, if it's a centrifugal or whatever. I only got the 2-inch spacer for clearance for the distributor. Admiral, I'm going to test that. I still don't see how adding a turbo to a Kenny Bell is not gonna add more power like we would expect it to do. Didn't Gale burn up the Roots blower by not having fuel go through it on that when he was originally doing that diesel test, or did somebody tell me something incorrectly about that? Have you tried super chilling the gas to fight detonation? I tried cooling the fuel before, and it didn't show any change in power. Only got a 2-inch spacer for clearance. Yeah, I don't know on the 671 stuff, putting a spacer under there, where the amount that you would need to change if it was going to make a change at all. I don't think it's going to, because I just don't know how. I mean, if anything, it would be less responsive because it takes time to fill that space up. But there's going to be a bunch under there anyways. I have a Ford Lightning blower, and I've been mocking up on my 98 3 Series. Is it worth continuing down that path, or just turbo like everyone else? Well, Brandon, yours would be cooler, but I don't. It's going to be better and make more power with the turbo. That was a monster truck engine. This was a SEMA build that had a Whipple in mind from day one. Regarding fuel cooling, how cold are you getting the fuel? I'd have to go back and look at the data and see. We just basically ran it through ice water with a heat exchanger. So I don't know how cold it got. What's up? Anything the blower might become a restriction to turbo. That's what normally happens. I mean, that's what happens in the power portion of the equation. I might have it backwards. Might have been the blower pulley that got changed, but either way, it's better to compound with the roots. Okay. So the blower gave the volume to move the GT45. The GT45 gave the air back that could be multiplied. So it'll be awesome. It is awesome. There's no doubt about that. It's a lot better. It's if you think about it this way, I like to simplify this stuff. So if you take a 300 horsepower motor and you're trying to spool the turbo, and then you put a blower on it, then now forget about the blower, forget about compounding effect or anything. Now, essentially, you have a 450 horsepower motor spooling that turbo. So which one of those is going to spool the turbo better and quicker and faster? It's going to be better everywhere. I'm getting close to pulling my small block 4 and turbo 400 out of the Fox. I dealt with it for 7 years. I wasn't mad enough to make the change sooner. I don't have a second hand here to help. Regarding truck torque, no, BS. That's not what I said. His question was about a motor size and blower combination, and not just spinning a blower faster or slower. An LS-based motor. What is the longest stroke you would run for torque with a Whipple 3-liter blower or turbo wanting 700 foot-pounds in a truck towing application? I don't. What size motor are you starting with? Because the stroke length has nothing to do with what you're talking about. There's no limitation on stroke length. The limitation on stroke length would be a function of whatever block you're using, whatever sleeve length you're using. And 700 foot-pounds with boost is going to be really easy with almost any size motor. I'm getting close to pulling my small block forward. Apparently half don't understand why. Blower takes care of turbo lag, turbo compound pressure, spool speed is what kills the turbo. All interesting, but not at all what we're talking about in the poll. If that's your response to the poll. I'm also planning on getting this L9462 to go in a Wagoneer. I know Engine Masters did one with a tunnel ram under the blower, and it made a big difference. Tunnel ram. Yeah, the reason that a tunnel ram makes lots of power has nothing to do with plenum volume, because that's not what they change when you change from a blower manifold to a tunnel ram. You're changing the design of the manifold from an ultra short runner manifold, which the blower manifold that sits under the blower is really short runner manifold and has no runner length, and so it has no additional charge filling based on runner length. The tunnel ram has a whole bunch of that. So what you did was put a much better manifold on it. Like if you did that test without the blower, if you did it NA and you just ran the short runner junky, they're not very good, blower manifold with a plate on it, a carburetor, 2 carburetors, however you want to do it, to equalize that for the tunnel ram, and you ran that, and then you took that off, and then you put the tunnel ram on, what you'd see is the tunnel ram would make more power everywhere, NA. And so when it does that NA, it also does that under boost. And that's exactly what happened, because tunnel rams make more power than that manifold does, and it does that NA and it does that under boost. Assuming the blower is big enough to add positive pressure on the engine, can't imagine any configuration that wouldn't behave any different than just a large engine with a turbo on it. Yeah, that's what they do. Would be a cool opportunity to do a water to air intercooler for the blower and an air to air for the turbo with stage cooling. That's what we did when we ran the twin turbos feeding the 112 blower on the 03 Cobra motor. that came factory with an air-to-air or an air-to-water intercooler under the blower. And then we also had the 2 turbos blowing through a front-mounted intercooler, then going to the blower. So you had intercooling for both of them. We were only running 7 pounds from the turbos. They were wastegated to set to provide 7 pounds to this combination. And then the blower pulley was set up with like, I think it was making like 11 pounds. And so that combination was run together. But there were two different types of intercoolers on it. Easy to pull 350 Windsor and a Turbo 400 connected with a picker, or just the engine by itself. I may need to get my Turbo 400 worked on. You're going to take the hood off, obviously, and then you probably could get both of those out if the car is high enough up so that when you get the angle that you're going to need to drop the transmission, or if you can get the car up on a lift and just take the trans out and then take the engine out. Okay, I was thinking a 408 cubic inch with a 7875, so 700, 800 foot-pounds won't be a problem. No, if you're talking about peak torque, that will be easy. Yes, you're asking a different question. You're asking if you should have a bigger blower and spin it slower, or a smaller blower and spin it faster. Which one of those is the best? And there's not an answer to that. His question was small motor and big blower, or big motor and small blower. Those are different things. Super chilling gas using dry ice and a heat exchanger could be interesting. I don't think that that's where you're going to get. I think I think the fuel will convert itself to power better when it's not that cold. I don't think that you're going to get charge cooling from that significantly, because the fuel is already going to do that if you inject it in the right place. If it's injected down at the port, I don't think you have enough time for that to happen if you were to change the temperature of the fuel. I think if you don't want the fuel to be boiling, obviously. You want to not have that happen. But somewhere in the normal range, I think that's going to be fine. I don't think any of those have an effect the way intercooling does and the way water meth injection, those kinds of things do, regarding, change of the detonation threshold. Progressive loans. No, thank you. We don't want any loans. We don't need no stinking loans. And we're back. Big motor is better for longevity. Big blower is better for max power. At the same point, big motor and small blower will be longer lived. And if you want to talk about these big generalities, big motors and small blowers, what is it you're trying to get done? Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about what thing you're actually trying to get done. Stop using generalities as this is going to work. Just tell me what power do you want to make and where do you want to make it, and then we'll tell you what will do that. It's a lot easier rather than, like I said. I think moving the injector up higher in the runner is worth it. Yes, we know that does something. We have already done that. We've done that testing a lot. The farther that you move it, the more temperature change you get, up to a point. There's probably a limit to that. Used to have an 8P71 Detroit diesel turbo into a blower, but that was an underwhelming 350 horsepower. Was that a two-stroke diesel? I've seen those before. Charge cooling is good. not saying it can't make it better, but doesn't supercharger only had 25 horsepower or something over NA, so the turbo is probably better all around. James, which one are you talking about? If we're talking about the one in the example is the 3800 V6, so that supercharger can make more than 600 horsepower, depending on what you do to it and how fast you spin it. So it can add way more than 25 horsepower. Ryan, I think your question is, can you use half of the exhaust from half of the motor to spin a turbo? And yes, people have already done that. Saab did that on a production car. So that can be done. Twin 64 millimeter turbos on a 6-liter should be good for 1,000 horsepower. Yes. Tim, what are you changing into? Are you changing pizzas? On charge cooling, does the fuel fall out of suspension at some point? I don't know that that's an issue. I just don't think that. I think at some point you have just done all the cooling that you can do. Put an Edelbrock intake manifold on my 472. Is that a Cadillac? In my 86 Regal? I like it, but the hood doesn't fit yet. Nice. What Edelbrock intake did you put on there? Did they only make a couple for the Cadillac? Is it RPM or air gap? Yeah, charge cooling is always good. The cooler, the better. That's why we were talking about this morning. We were talking about intercoolers. Intercoolers and octane and E85. Get as much of that as you can. The more of that you have, the bigger your tuning window is, the big margin for error, all the safety. You can make mistakes. Your fuel pump can start to go out and you can see that, and you could lift off the gas and save it, all of that stuff. I'd rather leave 10 or 20 or 30 horsepower on the table than try to get that. How much power will the direct injection support? An LT4 pump, LT4 injectors? I don't know. I don't know what that number is. I don't know what guys have made with that. I know that it will depend a little bit on if you're using the stock camshaft, if you're using the stock drive lobe on the cam that drives the pump. They have ones that will lift it higher and spin it, not spin it faster. I don't know if they have dual lobes on those or not. I wouldn't think that they would. That seems like it would be a lot. But you can ramp the pump up with the camshaft also. I don't know. I'm thinking it's 800 or 900 or something like that. BS. So you're going to move your injectors 42 inches. I think that there is a point, depending on the shape of the runner, the length and the shape, you could get fuel come out of suspension. Stock LT4 injectors are not enough to support stock LT4 power with E85. I'd have to add. I know Brian's run some LT4 stuff, so I'll have to ask him, because I know that they've used the LT4 injectors on some of their motors that they've run. Working with a guy on a factory twin charge VW 1.4. Cool. Made 300 wheel horsepower going to a bigger turbo with a stock supercharger. It wouldn't surprise me on the factory setup. The factory setup is set up to be able to produce a given amount of power. They didn't put 500 horsepower worth of stuff on there to have the factory rating be, let's pick a number, just 200 horsepower. They're not going to do that. They're not going to leave that much on the table. If the factory rating is 200 and then you can get to 300 with their stuff, that's more normal. There's usually some room there, but not an infinite amount. Is water method injection helpful to an F1R? Is that the blower type that you're talking about? If it is, if it's a Pro Charger, then yes. It's better than not having an intercooler. So the combination is a blower with no intercooler blowing through a fuel injected motor that's port injected. That's the worst combination. The next one is a blower or turbo blowing through a carburetor that where you're blowing through the carburetor because you get charge cooling from that. Or you could also blow through like a 4-hole throttle body that has injectors on it. But so you're getting charge cooling by introducing the fuel in the manifold. So that's good. Then the next setup is probably doing that with E85. I don't know where the E or not E85 with water method injection. I don't know where the water method injection versus a blow through carburetor thing with enough octane, where all of that bounces around, but all that stuff's in the middle. And then the ultimate one is having all of that and having intercooling also. Forgot to mention, I got my 125 Trail 70 engine up and running. Nice. Runners on the Rover 4.6 project. I figure if I can charge cool as good, then I can have a lot of room to play with. Okay. I don't know what nitrous is anymore for refilling. Have you tried a dyno where you have tried different exhaust pipe sizes on an LS or any V8 turbo setup, seeing how affects boost? Are you talking about the exhaust exiting the turbo? Because we have done that. I haven't done the tubes going to the turbos, but you're going to see very little change from that. You're going to see a lot of change, a lot more change from the exhaust side exiting the turbo. We did 3-inch, 3.5, and 4-inch exiting the single turbo. The GT45 will make 600 on a 3800. Some Eaton blowers available on 3800 can only dream. We've made more than 600 on a V8 with a modified M90. It's a Gen 5 M90, and there are M90s that make even more. The ones that they use on the Fords, as somebody had pointed out here, the ones that they use on the Salines or Roushes, those blowers have that rotor pack in it, but also have a much better housing, much better discharge, and much better entry. It's bigger, and so they support more power. So we had to modify the one that we have. So if you got a big inlet going into it, and then you modify the discharge, the guys from Jokers had ported the blowers, which they did a great job. And so if you put something like that on there, you can make more than 600 horsepower. It'll make more than that. It'll make 600 on a 3800. We just have to get the rest of the motor there. Why would a GT45 be a restriction to the blower? It's not really. The concern was, I don't know if you're here at the beginning, concern was on initial tip in where the blower has to breathe through the turbo. Is that a problem initially? Not later on. We know that the turbo can make more power than that blower can, particularly a stock one, because in that instance it even had the stock throttle body and everything on there. So that's not going to support very much power. Even when you spin it way up. Shouldn't headers on a turbo engine increase the base engine power similar to NA, but more when added boost? But whenever we're running these motors and comparing the NA motor to the boosted motor, we're comparing a motor with headers on it. So it already has headers. So it hasn't changed anything when we put the turbos on there. In fact, in most instances, like on an LS, we run the motor with headers on it. And then I put a turbo setup on it, and I use truck manifolds on it to feed the turbo. The LNF Ecotech cam has 3 fuel pump lobes on it. They do run lots of pressure in those. Turbo, pure turbonium. I need a turbo something. I need to be driving it around. Just to watch the boost gauge is fun. Log versus manifold versus header. On my blown 396, I'll be running twin GT45. So when I finish it up, I'm going to run the blower long enough for numbers, then slap the turbos on it. What blower are you running on it, KD? Most of the LS stuff, certainly of the last few years, has been the truck manifolds. Before that, we did a lot of the tubular headers, but they were awful. Not awful in terms of performance. They were fine. All the Big Bang motors, well, not the later Big Bang motors, like the 6-liter, the one that made lots of power, that had those tubular headers on it. And it does sound better, and I think it makes more power. It does. We just didn't verify that because we didn't have a way to connect the other two. I can try to do that, but when we're running those headers and hooking up that single turbo system, it's hard for the headers to be the only change. The Y pipe's going to change too. And then possibly the turbo location. That shouldn't make a big difference going as long as we have the same turbo and go through the same intercooler and have the same water and all that. We could try that and see. I tend to think that if we run it at the same boost level, that the power might be very similar. Oh, the 256 with the 565 Merc Cruiser. Okay. Was Buick V6 turbo any good? If you're asking if that motor was any good, yes, it was awesome. The Grand National motor, it was fantastic. The stock turbo that's on there was okay for stock power levels and a little beyond that, but not anything. You couldn't make a bunch of horsepower. Almost everybody did turbo upgrades on those. I'm going to go from a full exhaust to 3-inch to 4-inch dump in the front of the car with an LQ4. 7875 BTR truck 2 cam. What, Joe, was the full excuse me, was the full exhaust 3-inch and now you're going to a 4-inch dump? The 4-inch dump will be noticeably better. I'd like to see a 300 Ford straight 6. Why do you want to do a big bang on a 300 Ford? I mean, it's not going to make very much power because there's no. Are there any good cylinder heads for them other than welding up LS heads for those? I think it would be much cooler just to do 300 stuff. Full exhaust in the back of the car was 3-inch. Okay, that's actually probably not too bad. Were you coming out of did you have a single? You have a single turbo that went into, I mean, exiting the turbo, then went into a Y pipe. How big was the turbo? How big was the exhaust coming out of the turbo? I bet it makes 2 horsepower per cubic inch. So I wouldn't see any reason why a turbo 300 couldn't make 600 horsepower. A 3-inch. So you went from a 3-inch to a 3-inch to 2 3-inches? You should see a big change in power than going to just a 4-inch dump. Remember 300 Ford as being unkillable. You're not going to need a 5-bar map sensor to hurt that thing. It's going to get hurt way before that. and make adjustments on the trail 90. It's not revving as high as I want. Is it a ignition problem or is it a sprocket problem? We got 2 more minutes. 2 and 2. Chuck Woolery. Close out our poll at, is the GT45 turbo a restriction to the blower on a compound turbo blower V6? No, it's not. 80% saying no. Are saying no, it is not. Absolutely not. I think it's ignition timing and cam timing both. Okay. I think I just adjusted the ignition, the points or something on the Trail 90, and then also checked the lash, which the lash was good. And I think I figured out what was going on with the GoPed. I think it's a cracked fuel line from the tank going to the carburetor. So I think it's starving for fuel. I bet you'll need more than 3 bar to hurt a 300 stock bottom end if you keep it under 5,000. So you think 30 pounds of boost it's going to take that? Is this first stream of the night? No, it's the second one for today. The only hope for a decent head for the 300 was the prototype crossflow head Ford made for the UPS trucks. Pete, we did have a good Thanksgiving. It was awesome. On the exhaust side, the turbo is beneficial to go larger than the housing itself. Yes. Yeah, Steve, what we normally do is we do like a trumpet or a cone out to a bigger exhaust. Stream is usually 7 p.m. Pacific. Yeah, not at night. I remember Mahovitz did that way early on in his drag racing. I can't remember who told him about that. About stepping up bigger in exhaust coming out of the turbo. And then also, I think he was working on getting air with NACA ducts or something into the turbos. It made a dramatic difference. Pontiac Sprint, that would be cool. Although I don't know how much. Do you have any idea how much that head flows? Is that head's not even, I know it's an overhead cam head, but does it flow well enough to like make good power? I think those are cool. What's her name? Olivia. I think her name is Olivia. Was going to give me one of those because it was hurt. She took it out of some Pontiac that she had that she put an LS in, and I was going to try to do something with it, but I have enough. I have enough stuff. And on that note, it is time to go. I will see you guys all tomorrow morning.